we doing, everyone? Good, good. So this is going to be a fun panel. So I'm Brennan Tepper. I run the data business at NASDAQ, and we distribute financial content to many different types of clients. But here we're talking about the digitalization of fintech. And we've had the long-standing vision to be the trusted fabric of the world's financial community, and I think that sort of represents what we have here today. So real quick, I'm just going to introduce everyone. JJ to my right, JJ Kinahan's the CEO of IG North America and president of Tasty Trade. He's been on the retail side of the business for 20 years with Thinkorswim, TD Ameritrade, and Schwab, and prior to that, he was a market maker on the floor of the CBOE. JJ can also be seen on CNBC just this morning in NASDAQ Trade Talks, educating investors. Next, we have Dan Pipitone. Dan is co-founder of online broker TradeZero. They expanded with TradeZero America, TradeZero Canada. We're going global here. Before co-founding TradeZero, Dan was actually involved in Noble Trading, and they later sold that to Lightspeed, and then he powers TradeZero with TBTTS technology. Welcome, Dan. Pierce. When Pierce is not surfing, he's the GM of TradingView. Previously ran day-to-day, I think where we met probably at a Stocktoberfest way back in the day in San Diego. He's worked at StockTwits. And he also is founder of Merchant 7, not to be confused with Client 9. Gareth, next. Gareth, we have no idea what you do, but we're going to try to wing it here. Just kidding. Gareth is the co-founder of PersonaFin, which is a hyper-personalized AI for financial platforms. His company has hyper-personalized financial experiences for 15 million investors. And he's going to actually tell us how to replace moderators with AI. So I mentioned digital transformation, and everyone knows NASDAQ's an electronic stock exchange. We actually think a lot about digitalization, and we provide a lot of technology to the world. We actually supply tech to 130 exchanges around the world, and then banks, brokers, fintech companies, media, data on my Apple Watch, we power. And so we're always thinking about change. Change is constant. And so JJ, starting with you, so you started the career in the pit. And what's the one thing that really has shocked you in the transition to becoming more digital? Is there anything that just stuck with you over the years?
First of all, we can't replace moderators with AI because they wouldn't have Air Jordans like those. Those are really cool shoes, by the way. So I would say, I wouldn't say it's shocking, but I would say that the biggest thing, standing, jumping up and down, yelling and screaming for a living, first of all, was really fun. But that all said, I think it takes people a long time to grasp what's coming next, so to speak. People are very, as much as we all say we're in this fintech world, et cetera, at the end of the day, I think many people are still reluctant to change to what the next thing is going to be, or to even experiment. Not that you have to completely change, but to even experiment. I think a lot of times it's natural human reaction to just say, oh no, that'll never work. And, being probably the oldest person in this room, I'm assuming, I think one of the things that throughout your career you have to learn how to do is to say, I'm going to try a little bit of that and see how it works out. Because I see too many people, who I stood in the pit shoulder to shoulder with for many years, who are well out of this business and doing other things because they were completely resistant to trying new change. And by the way, you're going to fail a lot too. And I think that unfortunately in our business, sometimes people are very afraid to fail. And at the end of the day, if you fail on something you tried, a small amount, who cares? You go on to the next thing. It's just like a trade. Just when it goes against you, get out of it pretty quickly. But if you have enough winning trades, it works out really well.
Yeah, complacency is a killer sometimes, right? Awesome. So Dan, taking into consideration the new age of digitalization, what from the old world has come with you? What have you brought with you from the old world?
Kind of tapping into what JJ just mentioned. We have an operation on the floor of the Amex, which, believe it or not, today still, there are a bunch of guys in a crowd yelling at each other and trading various option contracts back and forth. There are not that many of them, and they aren't yelling that loudly like we think about. You know, I'll never forget the first time that I went to the floor of the exchange, and I had already been in the business for a long time, so maybe 10, 15 years ago, and I get down to the floor, and I'm so excited to be there, and I come up from the steps, from the hallway, and I'm like, wow, holy, this is NYSC. And my brother-in-law works with me he works for us on the floor. He was the guy who was bringing me in to show me what was going on there. And a couple of minutes after being there, I heard like a roar, an explosion, people like, yeah! I'm like, Frank, look, it's happening. Like, he goes, no, they're filming a commercial. That doesn't happen anymore down here. But today, they still conduct business that way. And so still a place, where, like I said, we have presence there in the Amex. They're executing millions of contracts a month, and a lot of it is still over the phone, over instant message, but the way that the executions are happening, the ones that don't take place on the screen, is interacting with other folks in the crowd. So while I was surprised that that was kind of still going on, at that point, it's actually still going on today, and it's still a fairly robust business. But I think
it
to your
stays?
point,
You think that stays for a bit?
you know, everyone's been calling the death of that for the last 20 years, and I think to your point, JJ, not just in the business, but in life, people are, you know, scared of change and they get complacent. And I think, you know, a lot of guys who are on the floor who've been there for some time, it's scary because, you know, they're not sure what's going to come next. But again, this has been something that's been talked about for a long time, and they're still there. So who knows?
Awesome. Thanks. So Pierce, you're definitely from a different generation. You didn't start your career in the pit, but tell us a little bit about your first few days of trading, day trading.
Well, my first few days, I was basically in college in California, and I had no pit experience. But at the time, actually, funny story, I was using TradeStation and still, I think, paying $8 a commission.
The good old days.
The good old days. So safe to say, I mean, I actually did discover the pit, if you will, online, which was more or less StockTwits, which I ended up joining a few years later. But that same kind of environment, I mean, that essentially was what I experienced to be the trading floor per se. It was just on the internet. But more or less, that was my early days of quote unquote trading was, and I definitely blew myself out, I think 3 or 4 times. But yeah, it was literally the pit online. But the sentiment that you get from that crowd, whether it be in a physical environment or a digital environment, is exactly the same. If you don't have that kind of tap as to what people are feeling or emotional about, you lose a big sense of like what's actually gonna move in markets in general. So
Awesome. The digital pit. All right, so we're gonna do a quick, just rapid fire, get you guys moving, maybe stand up, do some exercise, Hulk it out. Gareth, what's the first thing you bought with your own money?
CD. A really horrible Mariah Carey CD at that.
Awesome. Which one?
I'm not going to tell you.
Pierce.
First thing I bought, I think, wow, that's a good question. I think probably, well, as you said, I'm from a younger generation. I think probably Pokemon cards. Yeah, something like that.
Dan?
Going back in my first job, I remember like it was yesterday, I would always get aggravated having to share like shampoo in my house with the rest of the family. So I bought a bottle of Pert Plus for myself.
It's worked out well for you.
And look at your hair, it's beautiful. And mine will be
Yeah.
Rolling Stones Tattoo You album.
Very cool. Awesome. Moving into the digitalization, and actually what would be a conference without an AI discussion? We'll keep it light. So Gareth, you are heavily involved in AI. There's been a big digital transformation over the last couple of months as it relates to Gen AI. Where do you see AI going, and sort of how do you see AI being used when you think about who's up here in, wealth apps for the consumer specifically?
So the area we focus on is looking at using AI to create better supportive experiences For instance, creating content that's relevant when someone logs into their app, okay, right? So news and content has historically been passive, but actually using some of the kind of techniques from, Instagram, TikTok, Netflix, taking that kind of idea, understanding what a user wants, understanding the behaviors, and then using AI to generate content or select content that's much more valid, right? So AI can understand the behaviors of a trader, identify positive traits and negative traits, recommend education. So we see it right now as much more of a symbiotic tool that sits alongside with the trader rather than kind of overarching, taking control of trades.
And that's what you guys do, right? You supply that tech to some of the retail brokers.
Yeah, totally. So we empower trading platforms to create unique experiences on a one-to-one basis, right? So hyper-personalized content, the feed's always relevant, they understand, if you're losing your shirt, they can recommend education, they understand the behavior. Because that's really the thing, like most retail traders come on the platform and lose out. And especially in Europe, right? On the side of buses, they say like 79% of our customers lose all their money, right? And so anything we can use, especially kind of tools like AI, to actually help with that experience and empower people and identify behaviors that are negative and make the number better is a positive thing.
Very cool. So obviously there's a lot going on in that space, and as it relates to regulated brokers. So maybe JJ or Dan, can you talk a little bit about how you think about AI on your products, and then also how you think about AI when it comes to the regulators?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, obviously the customer service element, not only from content, but also if someone uses chat functionality to talk to your customer service reps or calls in on the phone to talk to your customer service reps. You can make that interaction, to your point, Gareth, a lot more personalized really quickly and gather some of that information. But as far as regulators, I think it's really interesting, why wouldn't you be able to use, so if you think about it, and you guys have to do this all day long, anything you publish on a brokerage side has to go through compliance. Well, why not have AI do not the final compliance work for you, but if you think about somebody from marketing writing an article, they're probably not going to get it all correct when it comes to compliance. So why not have AI at least do the first run and say, okay, you're wrong, here. And so that it saves somebody from compliance having to do all this work themselves and send back feedback. It's actually a great mechanism to help the marketing folks start to learn how to be more and more compliant as they do stuff, and it saves a lot of time and energy so that the compliance team can just sort of look at the final run.
I like that. I think at NASDAQ, we think about, AI on the product, AI in the product. There's definitely a ton of use cases, to help run the business. I don't know, Dan, what do you think when you think about, AI in the product and like the regulatory framework that you have to deal with?
I think, two use cases that Jay just pointed out to, make a lot of sense. And from a customer service, from a chat perspective, those are areas that we're looking at using AI as a tool. Compliance, it's another interesting thought. But for us, being in the brokerage seat and it starts getting weird as it relates to regulatory when you start talking about sort of hyper customization that could also be construed as a recommendation or advice. And up until we don't have real clear guidance on how we should be treating that as a broker dealer who's offering the ability to execute trades, I think for us it's more of a wait and see approach. Where in terms of bringing AI into the product, into the tool that's assisting. Look, I'll agree with you all day long. For traders that don't do well, that don't make profitability, if you believe in your heart of hearts that what you're putting in front of them is actually a net benefit, that's one thing, but the regulator may or may not agree with you on that. So up until we don't have some clear guidance on how we should be handling and in what situations it's applicable, I think for us, we're waiting and seeing.
To Dan's point, the new SEC proposal around PDA, if you haven't seen it and you're associated at all with a broker-dealer, please read it, because basically the way it reads is if we had a customer who had an option expiring and we sent them an email that says you have an option expiring, we'd be in violation of the rule. So it really is a proposal that's kind of frightening in terms of what's out there. And to your point, Dan, basically everybody would go back to 1976. We'd have to call people on the phone.
Yeah, how do we move fast with AI? So Pierce, when you think about the product, and you're not regulated today, but how do you think about, where you can use AI for the consumer specifically? Are there tools that are out there today? Are there things that, besides helping run the business, you can employ to put out to investors?
Yeah, I mean, it's night and day versus what the regulated entities can actually do. Therefore, it is essentially open floor plan for us. And there are a ton of services you can license, definitely, to build on top of your applications to make them extremely simple from a customer experience standpoint. What's a little bit different about TradingView is we do not license basically anything besides data, which obviously you need and you can't build yourself. But safe to say, we build a ton of applications on top of foundational applications. So you could think about them as like kind of laddered approaches. AI is just another step in that ladder on top of the foundation that we've already built, which is a ton of really hardcore advanced technical analysis tools. So from a customer standpoint, the simplest is going to be, how do I take this enormous chunk of data, which we license from every exchange around the world, and make that extremely intuitive and simple? But then we have an amazing foundation in front-end technology and visualization. And so not just is the query interface important, but what does that actually end up looking like? Like, what's the output of that? And so charting is one thing, but we do have a lot of other plans in terms of summarizing and simplifying what a customer will experience, rather than, here's 10 years of candle charts, and, does that really tell me a lot about my investment? Probably not. And so we've been very, very guns blazing on this quietly, but for probably 2 years now. So.
Yeah. And then how do you do that with the fact that the screen size has come down to something that fits in your pocket? So I don't know, Pierce, if you want to start, like,
Sure.
What is it that investors may not have tomorrow that they have today, and how do you sort of bubble up the information for an investor on a small phone?
Yeah, I mean, this is the form factor that people really love. I mean, text is kind of the #1 super app in the world. And if I can simplify my brokerage to be more or less a group chat with like a therapist, my broker, and like maybe 2 other people, do you really even need a front end, like, ultimately? So I think a lot of that will happen where there's few products I think that'll be left after this. You'll have, a core interface, but very, very simplified. A chat app, and then besides that, I think execution. But you'll never even see it on the back end. So,
Non-display. All right, Gareth. So with that, how do you think where can AI and like specifically chatbots help from an investor perspective?
Well, I think this actually kind of addresses one of Dan's comments, I suppose, about regulation. When you start to use things like AI, it relies on data, right? You rely on what your users are doing. So the granularity and the insight you now have to what your users are doing on platforms didn't exist before. You know what content they're engaging with, what they were searching for, what their intent. You actually understand the narrative when they're talking to a chatbot, right? That you can see the question that was asked and you can identify the response. So I tend to think that with AI and with personalization, I agree with Piers. I think it will just become down to a purely kind of, it will simplify. It will simplify platforms down to asking questions, asking for insight, right? But that insight will be designed off your own behaviors, your own insights, cohorts of people that look like you. And I think we're going to get to a much simpler interface, much more intuitive abilities for platforms to understand your questions, right? Because that's always, the trick in brokerage is always, how do you get your first funded, once the customer's funded, how do you get them to trade? Yep. Right, and I think that really starts talking to that. You can understand what people's behaviours are, their emotions, and play that data back, support them by the trade through.
Maybe that like 10-year candlestick chart is like just an answer to a question in a chat.
100%. It's an answer to a question, right? And then if there's lack of understanding, maybe it's a prompt to education, and then maybe it's surface in the data. Yeah. But it's definitely simplified, and you're kind of lowering the barriers to entry to market, I think.
Yeah. So JJ, thinking about next year and kind of like everyone's roadmaps are churning for what we're going to do in 24. How do you think about digitalization for IG and the team, and sort of what are the features that clients want in the new year?
Well, I think it's interesting, Pierce talking about the interfaces. one of the things that you also find is that your clients tend to want the exact same experience on a phone that they might have on a downloadable platform. So it's like, okay, how do I get this risk graph to look exactly the same on this screen as you can on a laptop or something like that? So again, it's really this constant combination of how do we appeal to somebody who's brand new to the market compared to some a lot of our clients who are trading options, futures, hedging against each other all day long, et cetera. So there really is this constant trade-off that you have to do in terms of what you develop on your technology so that your clients are happy who trade quite a bit, but you also have things that are, the person coming on, you don't scare the children, so to speak. The first time they come on, they're not as afraid of everything you have on there. So you constantly balance with platforms, and I would say that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And then I think the next one that we'll all be talking about, and I know your exchange we're talking about all the time with Greg, et cetera, is zero DTE, or I'll call it short-term traded options, because they are actually around for 7 days, as it relates to individual equities, because I don't think we have that solved yet because of exercise and assignment risk for the retail client, and hopefully at some point we can solve that because there's definitely demand out there from people, but we just don't want to see people get caught up in that. Yeah. And I was just afraid we'd go an entire panel without mentioning short-term traded options.
I appreciate that very much.
No problem, bud.
We actually have some of the options team here today. So Dan, what are you excited about in 24? What do you see coming down the pipe for your platform, but just generally investors?
For us, it's all about geographic expansion, and it's about options, as well as streamlining our platforms. So right now, Trade Zero, equities, ETFs, options. The options offering is buy to open, sell to close, single leg. So we've spent a good amount of time, effort, energy, money of building a universal margin calculator that would support multi-leg options trading. So everything around that, from the risk perspective, expiration risk and managing that, and having the proper margin engine to offer these complicated strategies in a very conservative treatment to ensure that folks are able to get into the strategies that they have the buying power and the capacity to do. And then geographically expanding right now, as Devin mentioned, we're in a few geos. We're expanding into the EU, out of Amsterdam in the first quarter, and later in the year into the UK. All for offering commission-free access of U.S. equities and options markets.
Awesome. Let's turn it to a little bit of rapid fire. That was fun. So we talked about what we did with your own money, but I guess, Gareth, what's the last thing you hit play on? TikTok, I know you love TikTok. Podcasts, your CD that you're going to tell us about eventually that you purchased. What's the last thing you hit play on?
A podcast by a guy, Robert Peston, who's a UK journalist who talks a lot about politics and kind of business news. He's epic.
Awesome.
Really insightful.
Shareable link after this, huh?
I will share a link.
All right.
Okay for him.
JJ, what about you?
I'm listening to the Elon Musk book by Walter Isaacson. I highly recommend it. He's a really interesting person.
Absolutely. Speaking of AI and data, huh? It's not just about cars. Pierce?
Actually, it's kind of random, but I rediscovered Metallica, which brings me back to my younger years. And it's actually still kind of amazing. So yeah, it's pretty much what I'm listening to right now.
Awesome. They could be like your grandparents. Dan?
I sort of got reconnected to Howard Stern when he did the Bruce Springsteen interview. So I've been downloading his shows and listening to those lately.
Yeah, still one of the best
Pierce
moderators.
wins, by the way.
Yes. Absolutely. So, real rapid fire here. JJ, late night talk show, who's your first guest?
Well, since I'm just reading this book, I know it's an easy answer. I got to go to Elon Musk.
All right, what's the first question you ask him?
See, I wouldn't ask him. I would ask him, does he like disrupting his personal life as much as he just likes disrupting everything else?
What do you think the answer is there?
I don't know. I bet nobody's ever asked him that before, but I find people who like to disrupt, they disrupt everything in their life. So
Very true. Good one. I like that. Dan?
I was going to say Elon. You took my my answer.
ask a different question.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Kim Kardashian. And why I'm saying that is because my wife this weekend was telling me she's in love with the Skims underwear. And she was telling me that, hey, they just came out with a men's version, and interestingly enough, they became the premier the flagship underwear of the NBA, whatever. So I was like, all right, that's interesting. I think I'm going to give them a try. So I talked to her about life and business.
Very cool. Do you have a pair yet?
I don't, but I think I'm getting one for Christmas.
All right.
That's what I heard.
Well, they have like a Knicks logo.
Late night talk show.
Late night talk show. I'd say I'm very curious to reconvene with SBF. I met him in Bahamas a couple years ago. At the time, he was like very much hard to pin down for like a conversation. I realized after the fact it's because he was probably very medicated at the time. And so safe to say, it'd be very interesting to reconvene now, I think, like 2 years into the future. And I know he loves the media anyways. I'd be happy to kind of facilitate that conversation, knowing full well that a lot of people are still giving him very, very good press. It's very interesting to like learn how he rationalized a lot of stuff and kind of dig into that, because I have a bunch of friends who work there and they absolutely got hosed. They had no idea what was about to happen, so I'd be happy to have him on.
What are you dying to ask him?
First question I would probably ask is like, what's your prescription? Because honestly, like the scale of like this guy's conversation was so off the walls. I had no idea like how to keep track of what he was even saying. And yeah, so I'd be very interested.
Very cool. Gareth, late night talk show.
I'd like to have Mark Zuckerberg on. And I'd like to ask him what he thinks is next, right? Because he creates such a transformation of generation through connecting people through social media. And obviously, I'd hope he'd be aware that he isn't the one to lead the next revolution. But I'd really like to get his insights on what he learned and what he said, and how that drives the next kind of major revolution in tech.
Awesome. Great answers. We are wrapping up time. Gareth, what are you most excited about next year?
Personalized AI-driven education. I think that's a really, really interesting place. Really using content and education to just drive the best results for the individual. And I think that's a really, really interesting place.
Awesome. I agree. I mean, we all know education is key to everything we do. It's important if you want to sell products, if you want to have, consumers use your tools, you need to make sure that you're educating and you're providing value 24 hours a day, and not just, when they're on doing their own research. Pierce, if you were a public company, what would be your ticker symbol?
Brandon asked this question, of course, because NASDAQ is a great listing company, of course. But TradingView, I don't know if that is easy to acronym, but I think TV may be taken already. Do you know? View is pretty good as well. But then I would probably be associated with The View, which I'm not really, I'm not really sure that that's our market segment, but who knows, potentially.
It's kind of like this.
Yeah, it's The View, but basically the exact same, right? I don't know. I'm not sure. If TV isn't taken, that's going to be the easiest
We'll go
acronym
with
for us.
TV. I like that. Dan, what are you excited about in 24?
Multi-leg options. We also purchased a clearing firm in August. So next year we will start clearing our own business. We're going to get out there institutionally. So the options piece and the institutions piece, I'm really fired up for next year.
Very cool. Awesome. And then we'll wrap. JJ, what are you going to ask your family for the holidays to buy you?
Well, apparently some new underwear. I didn't know I needed them until just now. I probably, unfortunately to say, if you've seen me golf, more golf balls, because I lost quite a few this year. But it's not exciting. Sorry, or maybe socks. I got hamburgers on the socks.
Oh, I like that.
So I probably, I always
win the sock game.
I always like interesting socks.
Very cool. Good stuff. Well, thank you, everyone. Hopefully you all enjoyed fun little chat here today and talking about digitalization, and learned a little bit about the team. And yeah, I'm excited for 24 as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you, sir.